The security guard's hand clamped around my arm before I even reached the red carpet. "Service entrance is around back, ma'am," he said, his voice professional but laced with that particular contempt reserved for people he'd been told didn't belong. I looked down at his grip on my Valentino sleeve, then up at the golden letters above the entrance spelling out the Grand Meridian, my hotel, my flagship property, the crown jewel of an empire I'd built from absolutely nothing. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. Behind him, guests in evening gowns and tuxedos glided through doors held open by my own staff, people I'd hired personally, who had no idea their boss was being treated like an intruder at her sister's engagement party. The champagne fountains inside were flowing with Dom Perignon I'd personally selected. The orchestra was playing in a ballroom I'd designed. And I was being escorted to the service entrance like yesterday's trash. "There's been a misunderstanding," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady even as cameras from the red carpet swiveled toward the commotion. He shook his head, pulling a printed photo from his pocket, my face, circled in red, with handwritten notes I could read even from this distance. "Do not allow near guests. Service entrance only." My sister Caroline's handwriting. I'd recognize those sharp, aggressive strokes anywhere. They were the same ones that had rewritten our father's will, the same ones that had signed me out of family photos, the same ones that had spent 5 years systematically erasing me from the Morrison family narrative. "I have my orders, ma'am." Ms. Morrison was very clear. The bitter laugh nearly escaped me. Which Ms. Morrison, I wanted to ask. The one giving orders, or the one who owns every inch of marble he's standing on? I let him guide me around the building, past the valet station where luxury cars were being parked by attendants who nodded at me with confused recognition, past the loading docks where deliveries arrived, through the kitchen entrance where my executive chef looked up from plating hors d'oeuvres and froze. "Ms. Morrison," he mouthed, his face a mask of shock and fury. I shook my head slightly. "Not yet, not now." The security guard, oblivious, continued his lecture about proper protocols and guest list management while walking me through the bowels of my own property. We passed the wine cellar where I'd spent 3 days last month personally curating the selection for this event. We passed the linen storage where I'd chosen every thread count. We passed my own office, door closed, my name still on the placard. If you've ever been escorted out of a place you built with your own hands, you know this particular flavor of rage. Comment below and tell me you felt that burn, because what happened next made this humiliation look like mercy. I could see the ballroom through the service corridor's one-way mirror, the kind we installed for security monitoring. 200 guests glittered under crystal chandeliers, each fixture costing more than most people's cars, each one chosen by me during the renovation 3 years ago when I'd transformed this dying hotel into the city's most prestigious venue. And there she was, Caroline, my baby sister, radiant in white Marchesa, working the room like a politician's wife, her smile bright and hollow as a church bell. Next to her stood a man in an impeccable Tom Ford tuxedo, and something about the slope of his shoulders made my breath catch. I stepped closer to the glass, and the world tilted sideways. James Ashford. The broken man from room 307 at my Riverside hotel 3 years ago, the one who'd spent 2 months putting himself back together with late-night conversations across my front desk, the one I'd saved from the edge of something dark and permanent, the one who'd checked out and disappeared back into his world of arranged marriages and family expectations. The one I'd tried very hard to forget. My hand found the wall for balance as memories crashed over me like storm waves. 2 a.m. conversations about what it meant to live for yourself instead of family legacy. His confession that he'd never met anyone who saw him as just James, not the Ashford heir. The night he'd cried in the empty lobby and I'd sat beside him in silence because some pain doesn't need words. His last day, when he'd promised to never forget the person who reminded him he was more than his last name, when he'd asked for my number and I'd deflected because mixing my worlds felt dangerous, when he'd left and I'd told myself it was better this way. And now he was here, in my hotel, about to marry my sister, having no idea that the kind front desk clerk who'd saved his life and the failure sister, Caroline, had been trash-talking for months were the same person. The cosmic cruelty of it made me want to laugh or scream or both. "Ma'am, you need to move along," the security guard said, impatient now. Ms. Morrison gave strict instructions. I know what instructions she gave. I cut him off, my voice colder than I'd intended. I watched Caroline lean into James, whispering something that made him smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did with her. I'd seen genuine joy on his face before, in those stolen late-night moments when he'd talked about the kind of life he wanted instead of the one being chosen for him, and this wasn't it. This was the smile of a man who'd given up, who'd crawled back into the beautiful cage and accepted that some people aren't meant for happiness, just obligation. My chest ached watching him settle for less than he deserved, watching my sister drape herself over him like a prize she'd won, watching this whole glittering lie play out in a venue I'd built as a temple to second chances and new beginnings. Then I saw her, my grandmother, small and frail in a wheelchair near the corner, and my heart cracked clean through. 92 years old, hands trembling with Parkinson's, the woman who'd raised me when my mother was too busy social climbing to remember she had daughters. She was scanning the crowd, looking for someone, and I knew with absolute certainty she was looking for me. 2 weeks ago, her voice weak on the phone, "Please, Alexandra. I'm dying, and I need to see my granddaughters together one last time. Whatever Caroline did, whatever happened between you, give an old woman peace before I go." I'd promised. I'd RSVP'd yes despite knowing it would cost me, despite Caroline's threat through our mother that I'd regret showing my face, despite every instinct screaming this was a trap. Because you don't say no to the one person who never stopped loving you. You show up, even when showing up means being treated like you're nothing. That's the thing about love and family that nobody tells you. Sometimes they're the same thing, and sometimes they're mortal enemies, and you have to choose which matters more. Drop a comment, have you ever suffered humiliation for someone you loved? Because I need to know I'm not alone in this. I made my decision. I'd like to see my grandmother, I told the security guard, my voice steady again. Just for a moment. Then I'll leave. He shook his head. Ms. Morrison said no contact with guests. I can't. I'm not asking permission, I said quietly, and something in my tone made him step back. I'd built a multi-million-dollar empire by knowing exactly when to push and when to wait, and right now, I was done waiting. I moved toward the service door that led into the ballroom, and he grabbed my arm again, harder this time. "Ma'am, I will have to remove you from the premises." The door swung open. James stood there, his face flushed, his tie slightly loosened like he'd been pulling at it. He'd clearly escaped the party for air, taken a wrong turn toward the service areas, and now we were 3 feet apart with a security guard's hand on my arm and 3 years of history hanging in the air between us like a question nobody wanted to ask. Time did that thing where it slows down and speeds up simultaneously. I watched his eyes scan past me, polite dismissal of someone he didn't know, then snap back like he'd been electrocuted. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might actually faint. "Alex," he whispered, and the way he said my name, like a prayer, like a curse, like drowning man spotting shore, made every carefully constructed wall I'd built around that period of my life crumble into dust. "Alex from the Riverside?" The security guard's grip loosened in confusion. I stood perfectly still, watching James's brain try to reconcile the woman he'd known with the woman standing in front of him in a designer dress being escorted through service corridors. His eyes dropped to the guard's hand on my arm, and something dangerous flashed across his face. "What the hell is going on? Why are you?" He stopped, really looking at me now, at the situation, at the wrongness of it all. "Why are you back here?" "James, I started, but Caroline's voice cut through the air like a blade. "James? Darling, where did you go?" She appeared in the doorway behind him, and her face transformed from concern to pure venom the second she saw me. "What is SHE doing here?" I gave explicit instructions. The security guard straightened. "I was escorting her out, Ms. Morrison." She tried to access the ballroom, she tried to ruin my engagement party, you mean, Caroline hissed, stepping forward. And then she made her fatal mistake. She looked at James and said, with absolute contempt dripping from every word, "This is the sister I told you about. The pathetic one. The failure. I'm so sorry you have to see this, darling. She's always been desperate for attention." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes earthquakes. James looked at Caroline like he'd never seen her before. Then he looked at me, and I watched him put the pieces together. The woman who'd saved him was the sister Caroline had spent months describing as an embarrassment, the person who'd shown him more genuine compassion in 2 months than his own family had in 30 years was being treated like garbage by the woman he was about to marry. "This is how you treat your sister," he said slowly, and his voice had gone very, very quiet. "You had her. Caroline, you gave security her photo. You had her sent to the service entrance. Here's what I learned about revenge: sometimes you don't have to do anything except stand very still and let people reveal exactly who they are." Should I have exposed her right then? Should I have told James everything? Comment reveal if you think I should have destroyed her in that moment, or wait if you know that patience is the cruelest weapon. More staff were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. I recognized Maria, my head of housekeeping, her face cycling through shock and rage as she realized what was happening. The sous chef. 2 of my front desk managers. People who knew exactly who I was, watching their boss being humiliated by a woman who'd booked a party in a hotel she didn't even know she didn't own. Caroline was still talking, her voice rising in pitch as she sensed something slipping through her fingers. "She doesn't belong here, James. She's not part of our world." I was trying to spare her the embarrassment of being around her betters. Her betters? James interrupted, and there was something broken in his voice. "Alex, what's going on? Why would she?" He trailed off, looking around at the staff, at their faces, at the way they were all looking at me with something between respect and fury. At Marcus, my head of security, who'd just arrived and gone completely still seeing the situation. "Ms. Morrison," Marcus said carefully, and I could see Caroline start to respond before she realized his eyes were locked on me, not her. "Is there a problem? Should I handle this?" The moment stretched. Caroline's face went from triumph to confusion to something that might have been the first stirring of fear. James's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. The Ashford family was pushing through the crowd now, drawn by the commotion, along with dozens of guests, all witnessing this unraveling in real time. I could end this right now. One sentence. One clarification of which Ms. Morrison Marcus was addressing. But I was so tired. Tired of being the bigger person, tired of walking away, tired of letting Caroline rewrite history while I stayed silent to keep the peace. My grandmother was wheeling herself closer, her old eyes sharp despite her frail body, and she was looking at me with something like hope. "Marcus," I said quietly, and my voice carried in the sudden silence, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about the guest list." Caroline's nervous laugh was sharp. "There's no misunderstanding. I made it very clear, you made it very clear," I agreed, turning to face her fully for the first time. "You gave security my photograph. You ordered them to keep me away from your guests. You called me pathetic. A failure. Someone who doesn't belong in our world." I took a breath. "But here's what you didn't do, Caroline. You didn't bother to learn who actually owns the Grand Meridian." The silence that followed was so absolute I could hear the orchestra still playing in the ballroom, oblivious to the implosion happening just outside. Caroline's face went through several expressions. Confusion, denial, forced amusement, and finally, creeping horror. "That's ridiculous," she said, but her voice wavered. "The owner is some corporation, some holding company, Morrison Heritage Properties," I said softly. "Named after our father. The man who gave me a $50,000 loan 8 years ago when everyone else wrote me off. The man who believed I could build something from nothing while you were busy fighting over his estate like vultures." I looked at James, at his stricken face, at the recognition crashing over him. I own the Riverside Hotel, where we met, James. I own this hotel. I own 7 properties across 3 states. And my sister just threw an engagement party in my flagship venue after ordering security to throw me out like trash. If you're still watching without subscribing, I need to know, what's holding you back? Because this story is about to get so much darker, and you're going to want to see what happened when my sister's perfect world collapsed in front of 200 witnesses and the man she was about to marry realized he'd chosen wrong. Caroline's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. James took a step back from her, his face a mask of betrayal and dawning realization. Richard Ashford, James's father, pushed to the front of the crowd, his businessman's brain clearly calculating the social and financial disaster unfolding. And my grandmother, my sweet dying grandmother, looked at me with tears streaming down her face and whispered, "My brilliant girl. You did it. You actually did it. I hadn't wanted this. I'd come for her, only for her, willing to endure humiliation for one last family gathering before she died." But Caroline couldn't help herself. She'd needed to grind me down one more time, needed to prove she was better, needed the world to see me broken. And instead, she'd revealed herself in front of everyone who mattered. The ultimate revenge isn't destroying someone. It's standing still while they destroy themselves. Caroline's laugh came out strangled, the sound of someone watching their world crack apart. This is insane. Mother, tell them this is insane. She grabbed Margaret's arm like a human shield, and I watched my mother's face cycle through confusion, calculation, and that familiar willful ignorance she'd perfected over decades. "Alexandra, what is this about?" Margaret asked weakly. "Your sister is confused. The owner of this hotel is standing right in front of you," Marcus cut in, his voice hard with barely controlled anger. 15 years he'd worked for me, from my first rundown motel to this empire. Ms. Alexander Morrison is the majority owner of Morrison Heritage Properties. 7 properties. 1,200 employees. And ma'am, he looked at Caroline with undisguised contempt, you just had my boss escorted to the service entrance at her own hotel. The crowd had swelled to 50 people now. City council members, business owners, society columnists, the kind whose opinions shaped and destroyed reputations. Caroline's face went bone white as she tried to calculate an exit strategy. But James was staring at her like he'd never seen her before, and that was the crack everything would pour through. "You told me," he said slowly, voice barely a whisper, "you told me your sister was a housekeeper. Too ashamed of her failures to attend family events. That she'd refused to come tonight because she couldn't handle being around successful people." His laugh was broken glass. "You described her as pathetic, Caroline. An embarrassment. And I believed you." "She was a housekeeper," Caroline shot back, vicious now. "She cleaned toilets, James." "Just because she got lucky, I still clean toilets," I interrupted quietly. "Once a month, I work every position at each property. That's how I met James 3 years ago at the Riverside. I was working front desk, and he was a guest who couldn't sleep. We talked for 2 months. You told me about your family arranging your marriage, James. About feeling like a possession. About wanting to disappear under the weight of expectations. I helped you find yourself. Then you left and let them arrange a match anyway. They chose her." Richard Ashford stepped forward, his face stone. "Ms. Morrison, I apologize for this misunderstanding. Clearly we were not aware of your position. I'm sure we can resolve this privately." His eyes flicked to Caroline with cold fury. "My son's fiancé seems to have misrepresented certain facts." Margaret made small wounded sounds, and I realized she genuinely had no idea what I'd become. She'd stopped asking years ago, content with Caroline's narrative. "Alexandra," she said weakly, "why didn't you tell us?" "I told father," I said, my voice cutting steel. 8 years ago when he gave me that loan. Every year after, I sent reports. Financial statements. Photos of each property. He knew everything, mother. He was proud. And you know what happened when he tried to change his will to split the estate equally? The corridor went silent. Drop a comment right now if you've ever wanted to expose a family secret that everyone pretended didn't exist, because what I said next burned every bridge I had left, and I need to know you understand why I did it. Caroline's face drained completely. Don't you dare, she hissed, stepping toward me with clenched fists. Father was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. Caroline discovered he planned to change it, I continued, addressing the crowd. She found the draft will and convinced our mother to have him declared mentally incompetent before he could sign it. Dementia, they claimed. He died 3 months later knowing his wishes would be ignored, and I stood at his funeral listening to Caroline eulogize about family loyalty. Margaret made a sound like a wounded animal. James had gone absolutely still, staring at Caroline like she was a stranger. That's a lie, Caroline said, but her voice shook with guilt. You're lying because you're jealous. Because I'm marrying James and you're alone. You have nothing but money and empty hotel rooms. I was there every Tuesday and Thursday, I said softly. 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. at Riverside Hospice. Room 307. The nurses knew me by name. I read to Father. Held his hand. Told him about each property acquisition. Where were you, Caroline? The silence was suffocating. James broke first. Room 307, he repeated hollowly. You told me that room was special but wouldn't say why. Understanding crashed over his face. Your father died there. And then I showed up broken in the same space where you'd lost him. And you still helped me. Caroline saw him pulling away and attacked. So what? You want James to call off our wedding because you were nice once? Even with all your money, you're still desperate, trying to steal my man. If you think I should have walked away right then, kept my dignity and let her self-destruct, comment leave. If you think I should have destroyed her completely, comment destroy. Because what I did next surprised everyone, including myself, and you need to understand that sometimes the cruelest revenge is grace. I looked at Caroline and saw past the vicious words to the terrified girl underneath. The one who needed to be perfect because perfect was the only way she knew to earn love. Destroying her would be easy, satisfying for 10 minutes, ultimately empty. So I made a choice that would haunt her far more than public humiliation. Marcus, please escort guests back to the ballroom. This is a family matter. Confusion rippled through the crowd. However, I need to speak with the Morrison family privately. The Rose Suite in 15 minutes. After that, Mr. Ashford, your family can decide what to do with tonight's information. Richard nodded slowly, reading between the lines. James shook his head when his father tried to pull him away. I need 5 minutes. With Alex. Alone. Caroline's protest was immediate, but Richard cut her off. You've done enough. Be quiet. The shock on her face would have been funny under different circumstances. James was already guiding me into a small manager's office, the door closing with a soft click. The tiny room made every breath significant. James leaned against the door like he needed it to hold him up. You should have told me, he said, voice cracking. When we talked every night, you should have told me who you were. I shook my head. You needed someone who saw you as just James. Not the Ashford heir. Not a catch. Just a person who was hurting. If I'd told you I owned the hotel, that dynamic changes. The truth settled between us. Besides, you never asked my last name. He moved closer, and I could smell his cologne, the same one from 3 years ago. I looked for you. 6 months later I went back to the riverside, but you were gone. I thought about hiring someone to find you, but what was the point? I was back in the world where marriages are arranged. His bitter laugh. And my family chose your sister. The sister who spent months describing you as a failure while you ran an empire. James, you cannot make life decisions based on one night of revelations, I said carefully. You were about to marry her. Your families have agreements. There are expectations. Fuck expectations, he said with sudden vehemence. I've lived my entire life for expectations. I've been dying inside for 3 years, Alex. Those 2 months at the riverside were the only time I felt real. You saved my life, and I repaid you by crawling back into my cage. He stepped closer. I need everyone watching this to understand. Have you ever loved someone you couldn't have because the timing was wrong and the world was cruel? Comment yes if you know this pain, because what happened next broke both of us in ways that don't heal. What do you want me to say? I asked, exhaustion bleeding through. That I thought about you? I did. That I compared every man to you? Yes. That watching you stand next to my sister felt like swallowing glass? Yes to all of it. I stepped back. But I won't be your excuse. If you walk away, it's because you've looked at who Caroline is, someone who humiliated her sister, manipulated a dying father's will, lies casually, and decided you can't marry that person. Not because of feelings for me. What if it's both? He asked desperately. What if I can't marry her because she's cruel and because I've been in love with you since you told me choosing myself wasn't selfish? The confession landed like physical blows. I closed my eyes against the weight. You're in crisis. You just discovered your fiancé is fundamentally different than you thought. What you're feeling might be real, or it might be your brain trying to escape. You don't actually know me. 2 months 3 years ago. I could be terrible for you. Are you? He challenged. Has the woman who sat with me at 3 a.m., who talked me through panic attacks without judgment, is she gone? No, I admitted. But she's not available to be your escape route. I built this empire alone, James. You know what I don't have? Someone who chose me when it was hard. You had the chance to find me 3 years ago. You went back to your family instead. I don't blame you, you needed to try. But you don't get to show up now, in crisis, and ask me to be your solution. The rejection was gentle but absolute. He slumped against the desk, looking exactly like room 307, lost, drowning, desperate. What if I get free? He asked quietly. What if I call off the wedding, deal with my family's disappointment, actually choose myself? Would you give me a chance then? 6 months from now, a year, would you let me try? If you become free and stay free long enough that I believe it's real, I said slowly, and you've proven you can choose authenticity consistently, not just in one dramatic moment, then yes. But James, that's a lot of ifs. And you have a wedding in 6 weeks. He nodded, accepting the boundary even as it destroyed him. In another life, where everything was different, you're exactly who I'd choose. But we live in this one. Yes, I agreed, throat tight. We live in this one. He left, and I was alone with victory and loss tangled so thoroughly I couldn't separate them. The rose suite 15 minutes later held grandmother in an ornate chair, Caroline and Margaret standing like defendants. Grandmother, I said gently, kneeling beside her. I'm sorry you witnessed that. Her hand found my cheek. Don't apologize. I learned one granddaughter became magnificent while the other became cruel. That's information I needed before I die. She looked at Caroline. I raised you better than this. This is the moment I need you to understand. Comment mercy if you think I should have forgiven them, or justice if you think I should have made them pay. Because what I offered was somehow more devastating than either. Did you know? Grandmother asked Margaret. About Alexandra's success? Margaret's hands fluttered. She never told me directly. She cut herself off. How was I supposed to know? You could have asked, I said quietly. Any time in 8 years. But you didn't, because Caroline's version was more comfortable. The accusation hung undeniable. What do you want, Alexandra? Caroline asked desperately. You want me to grovel? Fine. You win. Are you happy now? No, I said simply. I'm successful, wealthy, employ over 1,000 people. But I'm also alone. Every achievement I've experienced surrounded by employees and empty hotel suites. You didn't just take my family. You took my ability to enjoy success, because success without people to share it with is just expensive loneliness. Grandmother's tears were silent but devastating. My dear, lonely girl. So here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm giving you a gift, Caroline. For grandmother's sake. I'm honoring your wedding contract. The Grand Meridian will host your ceremony as planned, reduced to cost, my gift so grandmother can see you married before she dies. Caroline's suspicion was immediate. What's the catch? The catch, I said, holding grandmother's hands, is you'll live with certain truths. Every time you walk into this hotel, you'll know I'm allowing it. Every wedding photo will remind you it happened through my charity. Every time James looks at you differently, you'll remember your marriage is built on lies I could have exposed but didn't. You'll have everything you wanted. And you'll never enjoy it without remembering what it cost. The silence was absolute. Because I was right, and she knew it. Public revenge would have been quick, satisfying, forgotten. But this? This gift would poison every moment of her perfect life forever. And me? Margaret asked quietly. You get to watch, I said simply. You get to attend Caroline's wedding and know it's happening because the daughter you dismissed showed more grace than you taught either of us. Grandmother squeezed my hands. What do you get, Alexandra? I get to keep my integrity, I said. I get to look at myself and know I didn't become Caroline, even when I had the power to destroy her. I get to honor Father, he wouldn't want me cruel, even if justified. And I get you for whatever time you have left. That's worth more than revenge. I left them there and met Richard Ashford in the lobby. Do you intend to interfere with this union? He asked directly. No, I said. What James chooses is his decision. I've offered to host the wedding as planned. Beyond that, I have no stake. The truth about revenge is this: sometimes the cruelest thing you can do is give people exactly what they asked for and let them live with the consequences. If you understand that kind of pain, if you've ever given someone what they wanted knowing it would destroy them, comment I understand, because I need to know I'm not alone in this darkness. They left together, and I felt absolutely nothing. But as I headed home, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text, knowing you exist, knowing you're living your truth, is enough to make me want to live mine. What if the possibility of someday is exactly the motivation I need to choose authentically for the first time? What if you already saved me again? I stared at it, then typed, then I hope you find your truth, James. Whatever it looks like. You deserve to breathe. The drive home was silent. Then another notification. Voicemail. James's number, timestamped during my time in the Rose Suite. I could listen now. Hear whatever he'd been desperate to say before he'd had time to think better of it. Or I could wait. Could preserve the possibility that maybe what he said was something that could change everything. Let it exist in superposition, both devastating and hopeful, until I collapsed the wave function by listening. The phone felt heavy with potential and consequence. My finger hovered over play. This is where I need you most. Comment listen if you think I should play the voicemail right now, or wait if you think some messages are better left until you're ready. Comment subscribe if you need to know what happens next, because I promise you, what James said in that voicemail will change everything. And if you're still not subscribing after this entire story, comment and tell me why. What's holding you back? Because I can't do this alone. I need to know someone understands what it costs to choose grace over cruelty, to give someone everything they asked for and watch them realize too late it wasn't what they needed. The voicemail sat unopened, full of infinite possibility. Tomorrow I'd listen. Tomorrow I'd decide what to do with whatever truth it contained. But tonight, I chose the quiet. Tonight, I let the message sit unanswered and full of potential. Tonight, I went home to my empty penthouse and looked out over a city full of hotels I owned and thought about the price of success and the cost of loneliness. Some stories don't end. They pause. They wait. They exist in the space between what happened and what might happen next. And sometimes, that space is exactly where you need to live until you're strong enough for the next chapter.